Welcome to Statistically Speaking, a CK Pharma Solutions podcast where Kay
and Caroline.
In each episode, we bring you conversations with industry leaders from pharma, biotech, and CROs.
Together, we explore market insights, career advice, and the latest trends shaping the life sciences industry. Get ready for discussions that inspire, inform, and help you navigate the ever-evolving world of life sciences. This is Statistically Speaking, navigating the world of life sciences. On this episode of Statistically Speaking, we're joined by Todd Case, Senior Director of Statistical Programming at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Todd shares what's kept him at Vertex for nearly a decade, how he's seen the role of statistical programming evolve, and what makes candidates stand out in the competitive field. Let's dive in.
Hi, Todd. Welcome to Statistically Speaking. We are so excited to have you join us. You have an incredible background and experience that I know our audience is going to love hearing about. So I guess let's dive right in. Can you share a bit about your career and journey and how you became the Senior Director of Biometrics at Vertex Pharmaceuticals?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Khulud, for your patience. We've been trying to make this podcast happen for a while, and I'm thrilled to finally be able to make it on and talk with you. So I am currently Senior Director of Statistical Programming at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. My career started way back, actually before the turn of the century. I was working for Northwestern University Medical School. And at that time, there was a lot of need for SAS programmers, but there weren't a lot of SAS programmers. So there were recruiters that were asking me about pharmaceutical. I actually had no idea about what pharmaceutical was. And I ended up joining a pharmaceutical company in New York City. At that time, it was Forest Laboratories. They were working on a drug, Namenda, which is actually still on the market almost 30 years later. And for the first 2 years of my career, all I did was annotate case report forms. And I thought at the end of, even many times during those 2 years, if this was all I was going to do during my career, it was going to be a short career in pharmaceutical. But after about 2 years, I got my first promotion, and I realized that actually annotating case report forms was really the cornerstone and the foundation. And there's not actually too many things that are still more important than being able to accurately annotate a case report form. From there, I went on, I got a couple more promotions. I worked on some submissions, and probably 4 or 5 years into my career, I realized that I'd been promoted a couple times. I enjoyed programming, but the things I enjoyed more were kind of going outside my comfort zone, working with people that challenged me, working with people that I didn't know, working with different functions. And I would encourage everyone to do that if you want to grow your career. But long story short, after about 6 years of just project programming, which is great, and if you do that your whole career, I think that's an amazing career. For me, I wanted to do different things. Management wasn't one of those things that was necessarily I wanted to do. I kind of fell into it, and I realized after I started managing people that I could actually get a lot more done, be a lot more effective, and actually contribute to other people's careers as well. So I spent about 2 years after my first job at Genentech, which is a terrific company in the Bay Area. Still a lot of great memories from my time there. And then after that, I went on to become a manager at Bristol Myers Squibb for about 4 years. And then I went to Boston, worked at Biogen as associate director for about 5 years, and then went to Vertex, which is just across the river in Boston for 5 years. And then I've been at Vertex now for almost 10 years as first a director and then a senior director. So that's my kind of career trajectory in a very short time span.
Thank you so much, Todd. I think, one thing that I noticed when we first connected with you, and I think something that we don't see as often anymore, is that you've been at Vertex for nearly a decade, which is rare these days in biotech. What has kept you at Vertex for so long? Is there something unique about the company culture, leadership, or like just the opportunity itself, that the role that you have right now, they're like, this is what I want to do and this is where I want to be?
Sure. I love this question. So all of the above, I think, would be the answer. But I think always it comes down to manager. It comes down to opportunity. It comes down to timing. When I came on board Vertex, I had 4 different offers. And actually Vertex was the last company that I interviewed for. And my spouse was like, why don't you interview at Vertex? Why don't you, take a chance on this? I know you have 3 offers. You already kind of have your favorite. And I actually went to Vertex. And I interviewed from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. nonstop. It was a long interview. At the end of the day, it's one of those interviews where it's so long at the end of the day, you're not really sure, where you even stand on the interview panel. But to go back to the question, I truly believe that being at a company is about leadership at the company. And about 2 days after I interviewed, not the hiring manager, but the VP of the department called me, and he asked me a lot of questions, and I wasn't really sure where the conversation was going. A lot of questions about what I wanted in my career, what I was most proud of. And first of all, it really stood out to me that the VP of the department made time to reach out to me, call me, in his time, and really try to get to know me and understand what my motivation was for interviewing at Vertex. And after that conversation, I had made up my mind to come to Vertex. Staying at Vertex is the second part of the question. And again, management and leadership is all about, that's really why I stayed. I have stayed at Vertex for 10 years. I've been given opportunity after opportunity. And Vertex is a really special place. It's a hardworking, very fast-paced environment with terrific people and terrific products, terrific science. I think, there's not much that's not terrific about Vertex, but I would say, my manager has given me a lot of opportunities. She's given me the opportunity and I've had the same manager for 10 years, and her management team, actually, I'm the most junior member of her management team of 4 people. So, I think between the 4 of us, we have over 50 years of experience just on her team. So, it goes back to management. It goes back to opportunities. And the last part of that, I would say, is, there's a lot of opportunities out there. One of the things that has kind of been my mantra over the years is and this actually came up, I think, when I met with both of you in January. My mantra over the years is to really not say no, to really say yes to every opportunity, as long as it's reasonable, as long as I have the time, as long as I think I have the capability and the bandwidth to do it. And I think between saying yes, giving the opportunity, having a really fantastic place to work that has those opportunities, has really what's kept me at Vertex. And even now, when I'm closing in on 10 years at Vertex, to me, in a lot of ways, it feels like day one. That's the culture here. That's how amazing it's been, in my perspective.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it's also really interesting to hear that it's not one specific thing that's kept you there. It's a culmination of things. And that's something, really rare. We speak to a lot of biotechs, a lot of pharmaceutical companies. And as Khulud mentioned at the start, it is really rare to see someone at a company for that long. Well, you started at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, as you mentioned, over a decade ago, right? When it was much smaller. And now it's a much larger company. How did you navigate that growth? What challenges or opportunities came with transitioning from a smaller to larger organization?
Yeah, another great question. I think I was very fortunate to join Vertex when I did. It was about, I think, around 2,000 people organization, and it was a little less than 10 years ago. And now I think it's around 6,000 people. And to answer your question, it's really still about people. I think as each cohort, or as each year went by, there were new people that kind of I was able to work with. There were new people that I got opportunities from. There were new people that I got ideas from, and there was still a stable group of people, that I was able to work with and really be able to trust. So I had a really good foundation. I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was that when I joined the company, I was really given a lot of autonomy in terms of growing the team into what it is today. And my team has been, in addition to the management team that I work for, one of the blessings I would say I've had at Vertex is that I've had a very stable team with very little turnover over the course of 10 years. And that team, means the world to me. They do fantastic things. They show up every day. They also have the mentality of not saying no. So our team is able to really be productive. Our team is, I think, seen as really a solution-based team, where if people don't necessarily find an answer or can't get an answer or have something that they're really challenged with, they feel they can reach out to us and we're able to provide that solution. So I think that's been kind of why I've stayed at Vertex for 10 years as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely really rare to hear, especially about that tenure aspect. I mean, this year alone, there's been over 50 companies who have announced like layoffs, but even through there on the upside, early, mid, late 2020, early 2021, when the market boomed, right? And people were able to get anywhere from 20 to up to $40,000 salary increase. The fact that your team stayed and all the people at Vertex stayed, I think is a true testament to the culture there. And the biggest thing I just took away from what you're saying is the people-centric aspect. I think that's the biggest thing when we partner with companies and clients. We want to understand, okay, great, you have strong, benefits, compensation looks good, your pipeline is good, but ultimately, what does that mean if you can't retain staff? Like, what are you doing to support your staff? And this is in more ways than just compensation. This is growth, this is development, career wise, personal wise. So that's something that I think companies shouldn't take lightly and kind of, ignore just because they have a strong pipeline or, compensation package that they're offering. Because ultimately, that's what's going to keep people in the seat long term.
Yeah.
And then that's going to help companies, grow. It's with those people. But if their focus is on always, refilling, replacing those candidates, then, the company can only grow so much by that.
Yeah. And I feel like people go, and I've had this conversation recently with a client, but people go where they're valued. People go where they feel like they're being, part of a team and like that that their manager has the best interest at heart. When people don't feel valued and feel like they're just there to be there and they're just another number, I think that's when things start to crumble. And I think the sooner, and I think that's maybe the approach. I don't want to speak for Vertex, but I feel maybe that's the approach that Vertex has, where it's like people centric. People are the most important, and when you have great people, great things happen. But then when people or companies, sorry, don't feel like people are the most important, everything starts to kind of crumble down from there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I obviously, just based on my experience, and I can't speak for Vertex either, but what I can speak for, my experience at Vertex has been that there's terrific people. Ideas are exchanged as opposed to like opinions or personalities. It's really an idea-based company where, the best idea is going to come through debate, through vigorous debate, a lot of times through really challenging ideas, challenging, what's going to work, what may not work, what are the risks, are we willing to take the risks? Like that's been my experience at Vertex. And in my opinion, ideas are truly the most important thing. I think without an idea and without being able to focus on that idea, without being able to really vet that idea, really throw that idea through the ringer and come out on the other side with a more polished version of it, it's really impossible to come up with a product. And I think from a people perspective, it's also the same. I know my approach is really to listen. I think my approach as a manager is to listen to my team and really understand where they're coming from, how they think. I tell my team a lot. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and the last thing I do at the end of each day is I spend time to listen to her. And I actually learn more about, in those 10 minutes, I learn more about her day than I do, if I spend the whole weekend at a tennis tournament with her because she's tired, and those are a lot like the one-on-ones too, right? Where people they spent all day working. They just want to talk about what they've done, what their challenges are. And I think that's been something that's really helped my career. And I would say, to the effect that I am, an effective manager, it's been something that I've been able to do really well is listen to people, understand their needs, understand their frustrations, and really just try to be someone that's there to help them overcome some of the obstacles that they may be having.
I mean, that's really great to hear and really well said, Todd. And with that, we would be doing our network a massive disservice if we did not take this opportunity to ask you some advice for statistical programmers. So we have a few questions lined up for you, and I will kick it off. How do you see the role of statistical programming evolving in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So obviously, there's a lot of talk about generative AI. And I would just say, that Pandora is out of the box. I think most pharmaceutical companies, including Vertex, kind of have a moratorium on using generative AI for very good reason. We work in a regulated environment. There's really no reason to take any kind of risk related to using generative AI for any purpose. I think in a regulated environment. That said, I don't know too many people that are not using ChatGPT or not using, some other form of generative AI in their daily life. And that might be part of just who I, just kind of who I hang out with and the job that I have. But what I found it most useful for, even recently, is planning. We recently went to London. We recently went to, traveled to Indian Wells, for those tennis fans. That are out there. It's just a terrific tournament. But the reason I bring both of those up is because, we actually planned a lot of those trips using ChatGPT, and everything we wanted to do, it saved us a lot of time. And really what, not only what, work is about, but what life is about, I think is saving time to do the things you enjoy most. And if you're saving 10 hours, planning your vacation using generative AI, that's 10 hours you can be doing reviewing a performance evaluation for work, if that's your choice, or spending time thinking about something you'd like to do for your team or just for your family. So I think back to the question about, what the role of the statistical programmer is in the future, I do think eventually generative AI will find its way into regulated space. Eventually. And I think that will lead to leaps and bounds and we already see that in terms of software companies. There's a lot, I won't give out any specific names, but there's a lot of software companies that we've evaluated just in the last 2 to 3 years. And in those from automating text for documents to potentially automating code for CDISC, STTM, and Atom data sets. And we've seen, a ton of progress in those 2 years. So I would say, I remember, I think CDISC was announced in 2004, and I think it was actually implemented in 2016, if I remember correctly. So it took about 12 years just for data standards to take off. And I've seen an exponential kind of increase in the amount of use of AI. Like it took so long for something that everyone agreed on in terms of data standards to actually be implemented. And what I've seen with generative AI is taken like a life of its own. It's just grown, it's a pull factor where maybe standards was kind of like, a push factor. People kind of had to do it. What I see people using generative AI for, again, not necessarily, not in the day-to-day work, but just in order to be helpful for themselves, is really being able to, plug into that, use it to, whether that's a letter of reference, whether that is a letter of recommendation, all those things save time and allow you to focus on your more core work. So again, not something we use in a regulated environment, but these are things I see creeping in. That I see could have potential uses. Another thing that I know is other companies are using is translating code from R to SAS, and even Python. And, the benefits, there's a lot of benefits, whether that's licensing fees, whether that's wanting to use open source, whether that's wanting to do anything else. I see a lot of companies already in that space. And I see a huge advantage of being able to use generative AI for those type of purposes.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear AI is everywhere. I mean, that was a really great example about, your recent vacation, right? So we're using it from anything from a day-to-day task, which is like planning a vacation, but we're seeing it in statistical programming, seeing it all over biotech, pharmas, science. Every leader that we've interviewed across biometrics, data management, biostats, and now yourself in statistical programming, everyone has always answered, that question with AI. AI is at the forefront of what the future looks like for these type of opportunities, specifically in biometrics. But of course, I know that's going to bubble over to all the roles in pharma and biotech and life sciences in general.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of that is, you'd asked about the future of the programmer, and I think the future of the programmer is really someone that still understands the data. It's probably somebody more senior that, understands the domains, understands how, to my point in the very beginning of the interview, how case report forms are annotated. You really need to have that understanding of the data flow from the very source, from the very first time it's entered, all the way through your analysis data sets. And I think someone with that kind of experience is going to be able to use generative AI much more effectively than, anyone else. It's still the experience, not necessarily. I think actually there'll be a less focus on technical skills with something like generative AI, and more focus on experience and understanding data, understanding clinical trials. That's my perspective, and I think in the end that will produce it'll produce a much higher quality result, much more efficient result. And I think we'll see, there'll always be the need for people. And I don't necessarily see that, reducing the workforce. What I do seeing it doing is having a better impact on the final result.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people think AI is gonna come and kind of take their jobs, and I think you've worded it perfectly. It's gonna be an add-on, and I think we spoke about this on other podcasts, but it's definitely going to be an add-on. They still need statistical programmers. AI is just probably going to make your job a little bit more easier than it used to be, which is going to be exciting to see. And I know after people listen to this podcast, a few questions they're going to have is, one, how do I get to work for Vertex? And two, how do I get to work for Todd? So those are going to be the two main questions that we're definitely going to get. So you as a hiring manager, what skills and qualities, and I know, people don't think about this when they're looking for a job, but hiring managers not only look for the technical skills, but they're also the cultural fit. Do you look for when you're hiring for statistical programmers for your team?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for the endorsement there. I think for Vertex, I certainly can't speak for Vertex, but what I can see at Vertex is that you need to be the best of the best to work for Vertex. And I think when I look for candidates, I think the best example I can think of now is my team in particular. I think loves to work with interns and students. We have various different programs with students, and when we interview them, and when I interview candidates, what I always look for above and beyond any technical skill, above and beyond anything else, is authenticity. When I ask a question, what I expect is an answer, and an honest answer. I'm not looking for a specific answer, a technical answer. I know if I ask a technical question, it can be answered 1,000 ways right. Every single one of them could be right. What I'm looking for is someone who can provide solutions, someone who thinks about the question I'm asking, someone who might give me multiple answers, or someone who might say, I don't have experience doing this. Let's move on to the next question. But I really look for someone who's really authentic, because life, I was going to say life is too short, but career is too short to really focus on people who want to give me an answer they think that I want. What I'd really want to hear is someone's true thoughts when I ask a question. That goes a long way, authenticity.
Yeah, I think, and we have a podcast coming out soon where just me and Caroline are just talking about recruitment in general. I think once we finished the podcast, we realized that transparency and honesty was kind of the big, theme. And I think, sometimes people are looking for a job or they need a role, which we completely understand, especially in this market. So they feel like they need to say certain stuff or say they have certain experience to impress the hiring manager, but when it really comes down to it, they maybe don't have it. But I think that is such a good thing to say. And I think being honest and transparent and saying, hey, I haven't worked on this, but, this is something I want to learn, and just being completely honest and true to yourself and what your experience is, versus like trying to answer it because you probably can as a technical person where you haven't done it, and just saying that you have and not being very honest and truthful. And I think people sometimes kind of forget that, which again, I do understand. Obviously, a lot of people have been laid off. So getting an interview is such a big deal to everyone these days, where they're like, okay, I've got this. I need to make sure that I ace this interview. And maybe being super honest isn't at the very top of their list, which again, understand with the market and everything that's going on. And I think with coming back to AI, what skills should like emerging statistical programmers focus on to stay competitive in the evolving market, but also in a very competitive market where there is a lot of statistical programmers on the market right now, which I can say grade A candidates that I've even like spoken to, to find a role or be part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's a great question, Khalid. I think the most important thing as a statistical programmer right now would be to understand the data standards and clinical trial data in general. And there's several courses out there for clinical trial data. Like this course. There's a lot of online places. I know there's also there's SAS-based training, there's R-based training. But to really understand the standard data models, so CDISC, STTM, CDISC, ATOM, and if you have experience, and there's a lot of data sets out there, there's a lot of, even with like clinicaltrials.gov, you can get a lot of information on summary trials too. So, it's not somewhere you're going to go and understand everything, but I would say curiosity is definitely something that's going to take you a long way. If you're a student or a young person or you're just looking to get into the industry, look, and also, ChatGPT and those things can really help out in terms of, what is CDISC STTM? What is CDISC ATOM? How would you create, AE in STTM using SAS code or R code? You can ask those questions in ChatGPT and you can get some great answers. I actually gave a presentation. Again, I just want to be clear, we don't use generative AI at Vertex, but when I'm thinking of my own personal growth, I often look at ChatGPT because I do think that in the future, that's going to be a tool where you're going to be able to go in and ask questions and get very, very specific answers that you're going to be able to apply to your daily job. I think that's still going to be a ways out there, but if you're not in the industry and you're looking to get in the industry, I would highly encourage using those tools, Googling, going on the CDISC website, anything related to understanding how we create standard data. And then once you have that understanding, being able to kind of apply it to how would you use and there's probably public data out there, but how would you like create these data sets for a phase 1 study, healthy first in human study? How would you do this for a phase 3 study? I know those are concepts that can be a little bit abstract, but starting with the standards is one thing. And then understanding clinical trial data, whether it's a phase 1, 2, 3 post-marketing study, that would be something else. If you have the skills of understanding data standards and you have the understanding of clinical trial data, that's going to take you a long way in terms of landing a job in the pharmaceutical industry. And going back to kind of something we talked about earlier with students, we've had terrific students at Vertex. Vertex also has a terrific intern program, and we've hired a lot of students over the years. And that's been one of the big things that they've been able to do is learn the standards, whether their internship is related to standards or not. During that first 3 months, that's really stressed to them. They understand clinical trial data, and many of them have been able to actually work with Vertex after their internship, whether that's contractor, whether that's FTE, or whether that's working through an FSP model. We've had them all work for Vertex, and again, basic understanding of standards and a healthy understanding of clinical trial data. Those two components are going to go a long way toward helping someone that's not in the industry get in the industry. And if you can get an internship or experience with a pharmaceutical or CRO company, I think those are very useful things.
No, I mean, that's so true. Why would you not use, AI such as ChatGPT to understand these concepts better and to better position yourselves when you're going into an interview or looking into this career? Completely agree. And I love that you just mentioned the internships at Vertex. It's something that we discussed in our previous podcast with Dr. Ilfra Lahore, where she mentioned, she's a director of biostatistics at ClinChoice, and she mentioned, people that are emerging students that are emerging looking to get their foot in the door that they absolutely need to look at internships. So I'm glad that you highlighted that. So, for all our listeners, our subscribers, it's definitely something for you guys to look into, go to. I'm sure it's posted on the Vertex website. I'm sure there's something on there specifically about internships where they can go and find more information. But this isn't the first time we've heard about, internships in a great way to, one, get your foot in the door, but two, ultimately these companies are looking for real world experience, and what better way than, an internship and, to start your career off.
Yeah, I totally agree. You could have a CV, you could have a PhD student that, came out of Harvard, but if they don't have an internship, or they don't, I'm picking on Harvard, it could be, any school in the world. But, you could have a PhD student with all A's, or you could have someone that comes out of a master's degree program from a state school, which there's amazing state schools out there. And if they've had, an internship at Vertex, an internship at Lilly, whatever company, and especially if they've had multiple internships, I would take the student with the internship over the one with the, with the education, probably 9 times out of 10. The reason I say that is exactly what you said, to stress the practical experience that they gain from an internship.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Khulud mentioned earlier, there's definitely a lot of statistical programmers right now, unfortunately, that are displaced. They're on the market actively looking to secure their next opportunity. So Todd, what is your advice? What is the best way for candidates to stand out when applying to statistical programming roles?
Yeah, well, I think the two of you really, and so at the beginning of this year, if I can just go back a little bit, at the beginning of this year, one of my mantras, even, as I'm entering, my manyth year in pharmaceutical industry, one of my mantras is to never say no. And I think networking is a fantastic way. What we're doing today is a fantastic way. If you're seeing this podcast for the first time, reach out to any of the three of us. We'd be glad to talk with you. But I truly think networking, I think, putting your CV out there, working with a trusted recruiter, reaching out to a hiring manager, those are all things that I think are very helpful. I would qualify that with a statement. If you're going to reach out to a recruiter, and I think the two of you, I follow your post too. I think, or a hiring manager, you really need to be authentic. I've had a lot, I think I've shared with you, I've had recruiters who've called me and say, hey, do you want a senior director position at Vertex? And I am a senior director at Vertex. I think, and it's not uncommon. And I know you deal with a lot of candidates probably that have similar kind of perspectives. So, if authenticity will take you so far in this industry, but back to the original part of your question, network. But if you're going to network, do your due diligence, do your research, know who you're talking to before you network with that person, and it will take you a long way.
I mean, that's so true. And it's really the basics. And you're right, Khulud and I, really talk a lot about this, about, when you're reaching out to a recruiter, we get, accountants to reach out to us. And if you looked at our page for 0.5 seconds, if you basically just glance at our page, you would understand we're life sciences, we're biometrics, we're clinical development, we're clinical operations. That's our bread and butter. That's our specialism. That's all we do. Literally, that's all we do. So for, a candidate to go and reach out to us for a role that is nowhere in the network that we have, it's just a waste of your time, right? And then, for the recruiters reaching out, with that example, I mean, we've heard of it, right? Or, I've even heard of horror stories of people sending their own people to the hiring manager. So it's about, just taking a beat, taking 5 seconds, do your due diligence, and find the right people to reach out to. And, those little details will be the difference between, someone rolling their eyes, deleting that email immediately, or saying, you know what, I have 5-10, minutes. Let me jump on a call. Let me see what this is about, or let me see if I can introduce them to someone in my network. So we completely agree with that. So on that, we kind of touched a little bit on this, but how would you elaborate on more, common mistakes that candidates can make, when interviewing for these type of roles?
Yeah, I would say, one, it's hard to kind of characterize the mistakes, but it's easier for me to kind of think about what candidates can do right, because there's so many ways to make mistakes, and there's usually only, 1 or 2 ways to to at least approach the question right. But I would say, definitely not researching the company before you apply for it would be a mistake. I think not researching the job description, every word of it, understanding what they want, what the education is, would be a mistake. I know these may sound like very high level things, but both of you know, like there's still a lot of people that just don't do that. And I think, when you I think I'm going back to what, I would like to say is like, really focus on what exactly are you looking for in the industry? What do you want? Is it realistic for you to apply for this position? And if it is, do you have a network? Is there anyone in your network that can help with this? And if the answers are all yes to those, that's probably a position you can apply for. If the answer, to a few of those is yes, then you probably need to make a few more of those questions yes. And I can give an example most recently of someone that we hired that I will just say did all the right things. So this person interned in my group last year, and this is a person who is a fantastic student with a lot of grit. And that person's internship came to an end, and we found a way to offer them a contract, and they contracted with us for the next 9 months doing that work. And then we had an opportunity to hire them through our FSP model. And during each one of these transitions, this person actually made adjustments. They had their kind of mindset on the thing that they were doing. And during each one of those 3 adjustments, internship, the subsequent contract, and the FSP model, they changed their mindset. They changed to what they needed to do. And, they eventually, I think perseverance and grit go a long way too. And also they understood that each one of these roles offered them experience that they wouldn't have had if they just would have stayed with their original internship, or if they just would have stayed with a contract or things like that. So I think there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but I do think, not doing the research, not answering the questions, not knowing the people, at least look at their LinkedIn profile. If they don't have one, look at the company profile. Really, really don't make a basic or silly mistake if you're seriously applying for a position.
That's really great advice. And on that, bit of a shameless plug here, but, the things that you just mentioned, to myself, Clued, yourself, these are fairly basic things. And honestly, I think we take for granted what we think are common, common practices when it comes to interviewing, like you said, researching the company, looking at the job description, looking at who you're interviewing with. Is there any sort of common ground? Did you guys go to the same university? What's their profile saying? All these things are definitely going to be really important. So on that, we realize that this isn't common knowledge, unfortunately. Like, these basic things aren't. So, colluding ourselves at CK Pharma Solutions, we recently launched a new service of interview prep. And we will be teaching, candidates and, people applying and, who are about to interview these steps, right? So we'll be doing like mock interviews, but also, as we just mentioned here, all the basic steps and what they can do to better prepare themselves and, put their best foot forward.
That sounds like a much needed program. And I look forward to interviewing anyone that comes out of that.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I think we also realize is people don't know how to articulate what their motivations are. Do you know what I mean? I think people just feel like, oh, well, I've applied for the job. They've given me the interview. That's enough. When they ask me about my motivations are going to be, I'm looking for a new position. And I feel like that's just not enough. Like, you really have to understand what your motivations are and understand, like Caroline said, understand who you're interviewing with. You can't go into the interview not knowing the company, not knowing their pipeline, not knowing who you're interviewing with. All these little things that I think people, again, it's second nature to us because this is what we do every day. But I think sometimes people need that help, especially in this market right now, when you're going to interview and there's 50 other people interviewing for the exact same role. How are you going to stand out? And you're going to stand out with the interview. Your interview is what's going to get you that role. It's not going to be your resume. It's not going to be your LinkedIn page. It's really going to be how you interview. And that's what it really boils down to. So I guess my question to you, Todd, I think if you were to, I mean, go back in time, is there any advice you would give to yourself as someone entering the field of statistical programming like today? Like, is there anything that you would give advice to yourself that you would do different, or kind of be like, no, I should have done this instead?
That's a really hard question to answer. I feel there's not a lot of decisions I would have necessarily gone back and done different. However, based on what I've seen in the industry, and I would say, and thinking about what we just talked about with interview, I know I understand this. I have a lot of empathy, right? I know there's a lot of great programmers out there looking for jobs right now, and I know sometimes they have a lot of pressure to show up for an interview and really perform well. What I would say is, when if I had to give any advice, and sorry, back to your original question, even to my previous self, I would say when I go in for an interview, dress my best, look my best, give it my best, sleep the night before, focus on who I'm interviewing with, focus on the types of questions they'll ask. You can Google types of questions I'll ask during it, or if you use ChatGPT, types of questions I'll get during initial SAS programmer one, position, and really study those. I think you cannot prepare enough for an interview. And then when you get to the interview, you need to have all that information. But again, go back to being yourself, because if you're not yourself and you're not answering those questions, it's just obvious that you may not be a fit. I know people feel a lot of pressure to get a job, but in order to get that job, you still have to stay true to yourself, know who you are, know what your strengths are. So do the due diligence, do the research, everything what you said during the interview, and be yourself on that day. Give yourself a chance to have that job. Be genuine, be authentic, be the type of person you would want to hire.
Yeah, I think you can never, like you said, Todd, you can never prepare enough. I think sometimes, people think, oh, because I've been being a programmer for 10 plus years, 11 plus years, whatever the case may be, like I know the job. Like and that's one aspect of it. Like technical questions is just one aspect of it. Like companies are also looking for the right cultural fit. Those like behavioral questions are also going to come up. So prepare for those, like prepare for that kind of stuff as well. I think, which a lot of people, when we do interview prep with candidates, a lot of the time, most of our interview prep actually is technical, but the other part of it is behavioral questions and getting you to think about questions that you want to answer, that you want to ask during the interview. And I think sometimes people don't have those questions ready, and they go to the most basic questions to ask. And I think sometimes those questions are great. Those basic questions that everyone asks are great, but you're going to stand out a little bit more when you ask a more in-depth question, when you ask more questions about their pipeline, or you saw something online that they've just done, or whatever the case may be. Like, oh, no, you've actually spent time in researching who we are. So that's going to stand out a little bit more than someone that asks, oh, what's the culture of the company? It's like, that's not always a kind of of course you can ask any questions you want, but to stand out in this market right now, you do have to be a little bit different. So I know when we met you in Boston, I think that was January, we met you in Boston, and one of the things that we discussed was networking. And even you mentioned earlier that one of the things for you this year, or your mantra this year, is not to say no. And from your perspective, what makes attending conferences and building connections so valuable for personal and professional growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I at the beginning of this year, you're right. One of the things I had made a decision to do was not say no, and one of the best things that came out of it, I think, was I think you had invited me to talk, and I thought this was going to be a routine talk where we're going to talk about, and we had a great discussion, and I do have great discussion with a lot of people, but I was not expecting a podcast as a result of that. And I think this goes back to your question, Khulud. When I go to a conference, when I sit down with someone, what I try to do, and I know I've said this throughout the conversation, is I really try to develop some kind of authentic connection. Like, what is, who am I? What can I offer you? Who are you? What can you, what's your passion? what are you good at? And what I try to do is make those connections. So, for example, if I find someone, I try to meet as many people at conferences, especially the more junior people at conferences, as I possibly can. And what I've done in the last many years is collaborate a lot of times with more junior people. I wrote a SaaS book about 3 years ago with someone that had been in the industry for a couple of years. And it's just really nice to get that experience of, someone with decades of experience and someone with a couple of years of experience. And we ended up, I think, with a really great SaaS book. And what I've done more recently is work with interns, work with members of my team, work with people even outside of Vertex on small group kind of conferences, mini conferences, Fuse single day events, PharmaPsych single day events. And what I've learned from that is not only am I able to network with people, I'm also able to go to events that I didn't even know existed, unless I went to those events. I'm able to learn, I'm able to get introduced to a lot of talented people who, regardless of whether I work with them, it's not my goal to, work for this person or that person, but it is my goal to learn from people. And I think when I go to a conference, the thing that I'm looking to always do is learn at least one thing from each person that I talk to. And if I talk to 50 people during a conference and I learn 50 things, that's a pretty successful conference, like in my opinion. And I think learning is always the key. So to answer your question, when I go to a conference, I really go to a conference to listen. I don't go to a conference to learn. Sure, I present at conferences. I do other things at conferences. I chair sessions. I'm on panels. But what I'm really there to do is learn from people.
Yeah. And I think that's why, me and Caroline started this podcast. Like, just to get, Caroline, you posted this today, actually. We have spoken to around 200 directors of biostatistics in the last month and a half. And these are all grade A directors and senior directors of biostatistics, like, people that I know we send to a job or get an interview like right away. And our network is so big. Like, we went to Boston, we were in New York. So we're always meeting clients all over. And we had so much valuable information. And we're like, what do we do with this? Like, where do we put this? And we're like, okay, we need to start a podcast and have these people come on the podcast and give this information, because everyone wants to hear from someone like you, Todd. Like, you have so much valuable experience. They're like, okay, that's what I needed. That's the kind of information I needed as a junior programmer, even as someone that's been in the industry for such a long time. So I think knowing our network and knowing how big our network is, we've been doing this for over a decade. And if you follow us on our CK Pharma Solutions LinkedIn, or you follow us individually on my LinkedIn and Caroline's LinkedIn, like, you see how much information we put out there to the biometrics market. And every day I'll have someone different message me like, thank you so much, like, I'm following your content, it's great, like, it's helping me so much. And we do that just to help people who are looking for a job or have an interview coming up and stuff like that. And even with the interview kind of service that we're providing, we've had people who we've helped and they're like, hey, you guys should do this. Like, this has been so helpful. The interview has been so good. The interview prep has been so good. It's actually got me to the second stage, interview. I've been looking for a job for a while and I've never been able to get to that second stage. So it's been that was the reason for our podcast and why we started the podcast. But I think that's all for today. So Todd, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. I know our audience is going to love this. To everyone listening, stay tuned for more episodes and take care.